Okay, time to continue the Q&A with part 2. Benjamin Weaver asks, what are your favorite colors? Obviously red and black. I mean, come on, you can tell from my YouTube character what my favorite color is. Do you have a specific religion or believe in yourself? No, I don't have any type of religion or believe in any type of God. The only person I believe in is me. And are you an animal lover? Yeah, I do love animals. Or at least I love them a bit more now than I ever did since my girlfriend works at an animal shelter. And I usually stop by to see what she's doing. We actually adopted an old English sheepdog, and she's like the most adorable thing you've ever seen. But yeah, I love animals. Next question comes from Ian Brown. Thoughts on Disney's current shows? I'm guessing you're talking about Disney Channel and Disney XD. Disney Channel I can't give my thoughts on because I stopped watching them a long time ago. And neither do I care because honestly I was never a huge fan of Disney Channel to begin with. Because their shows since the early 2000s were always made for preteen little girls. But I did enjoy a few of their shows like Even Stevens and Kim Possible. But if you're talking about their current shows, I can't say anything about them because I no longer watch or even care, because all of their shows are a bunch of cringe-worthy teen sitcoms. Disney XD I haven't watched much of lately, but I will say shows like Star vs. the Forces of Evil is a pretty good show. Same with DuckTales and Gravity Falls, even though Gravity Falls already ended. I'm not a fan of any of their Marvel animated shows, and I could honestly care less for any of their teen sitcoms. But yeah, I think Disney XD is fine. I can at least say they have a variety unlike some networks, Cartoon Network. His second question, what are your thoughts on Nickelodeon's current shows? Again, same thing, I haven't cared to watch much of anything from Nickelodeon since Legend of Korra and the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ended. And speaking of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if you saw my review of The Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you already know how I feel about that show. And as for their other shows, let me see. Right now I'm recording this on the current time of 3:42 and checking my TV listings to see what's going on. And it's a marathon of SpongeBob and Loud House. No surprise. Loud House I am not a fan of, and SpongeBob I have not cared to watch a single episode since like what, 2004 or 2005? Yeah. And some of their other shows are a bunch of crappy teen sitcoms that I could care less for. And other shows like Alvin and the Chipmunks and Rabid's Invasion I've never seen a single episode of. But yeah, that's basically it really, and thanks for the questions. Next question comes from Treyblaze 2000. When do you think Cartoon Network started to decline? Definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, 2007. A lot of people for some reason say 2004 was the downfall, which I don't understand why. They were still going strong from 2004 to 2005, even with some questionable changes. You still had a lot of great cartoons, and the city bumpers were an excellent way to show the variety they had. To me, I definitely started to see signs of their downfall around the summer of 2006, because you had a lot of crappy shows like Squirrel Boy and My Gym Partner's a Monkey premiering that year. Magoozy started to get stale, at least for me. Teen Titans was canceled that year. Reanimated was a terrible movie which was already greenlit for a TV series by Jim Samples. But 2007 was when it all went downhill. Jim Samples had to step down as president because of the whole bomb scare. Then Stuart Snyder became president, and we all know how his run went. And it's funny how we all blame Snyder for starting the live-action renaissance, but some of us seem to have forgotten samples sort of started bringing in live action to the network. I believe Samples said in an interview that although Cartoon Network would remain an animation network, there would be live action on the way. So it kinda tells me that Cartoon Network would have gone downhill even with Jim Samples in charge. But I will say, it sure as hell beats anything we're getting now. But back to Stuart Snyder. Sure, some of us remember him for canceling Toonami the next year in 2008, which pissed off a lot of people. The City Bumpers were no more. Maguzi was canceled, thus ending Cartoon Network's tradition in an action block for weekday afternoons. And he even made a terrible Friday block in Fry Dynamite, which is a block I'd like to forget. Shows like The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy and Codename Kids Next Door, and even Ed, Edd n Eddy ended a little after, thus being replaced with shows like Chowder and The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, which were two shows I never cared for. Not saying they were bad, but it just wasn't the same anymore. And I was already getting ready for high school, and it just wasn't the same anymore. But yeah, 2007 was definitely the downfall for sure. Man, 2007 was the downfall for a lot of things, or at least anything past 2005. But that's just me, so yeah. Next question comes from Evil Otaku 945. Why do you think we don't get good action cartoons or movies? Because the adult cartoons that air try to be like The Simpsons or Family Guy. By the way, I mean a Ruby level quality of action. Well, for one, it's probably because of the fact that we live in a PC politically correct world that doesn't want certain shows to push the envelope anymore, because they think that action cartoons are too mature or too violent for kids. So they try to play it super safe and try to water down a lot of these shows so that the parents won't complain, I guess. Another has to do with the fact that animation for a good action cartoon are very costly to produce. Hence why you see a lot of shows like Young Justice and the Thundercats 2011 cartoon get cancelled. And because of the fact that they want to try and be cheap and lazy. Thus, we get a lot of these chibi-style comedic reboots. Again, it really angers me that this is what we've come to in terms of quality action animation. And to me, it just seems like a big middle finger to people like me who want quality action shows. But it's a good thing we have shows like Young Justice, Castlevania, and The Dragon Prince on streaming platforms. But if you want this to change, support these type of action shows we have. And I'm talking about the ones I named you. So if you want more quality action shows, support the ones we still have so we can get more of this and put an end to this chibi comedic era. Number 2, in regards to Cartoon Network, I'm in the same boat as you. I only watch Toonami after 12 o'clock. But what do you think of Adult Swim? I think it sucks. I personally haven't watched much of Adult Swim outside of Toonami, aside from Rick and Morty, which I actually enjoy. But yeah, like you said, that's probably why I barely watch, because Adult Swim barely has anything that keeps my interest. And 3, with all the reboots that are happened, or that have happened, what shows from our collective childhood will be next? Well, I've definitely heard rumors about Ed, Edd n Eddy getting a reboot. And the same goes for Courage the Cowardly Dog, which I've heard they've been trying to reboot that show for quite a while now. Not sure how true they are, but hopefully they're not. But then again, if they do reboot these shows, I'm not gonna care because I'm done giving these reboots my attention, and neither should you. Next question comes from Dayman Harris. When did you think wrestling started to suck? In my opinion, I think it started to suck after the draft in 2005. Well, to me, it started to go downhill once Vince McMahon bought out WCW and ECW because of the fact that there was no longer any competition in wrestling. And because of that, you were gonna get half-assed shows from the WWE. Now, they were good for a while during the Ruthless Aggression times from 2002 to 2004, but because they no longer had a competition, it was only a matter of time before you really started to see a decline in the product. So yeah, I have to agree that it started to suck around 2005, especially knowing that that was the year that John Cena was being pushed as the top face of the company. And even after 2007, it got worse once WWE went PG. Because of the whole Chris Benoit tragedy and Linda McMahon running for Senate. Number 2. What do you think was the best console in the 6th generation of gaming? That is a good one. The 6th generation of gaming is my favorite era for gaming, alongside the 16-bit era. This is when 3D gaming was perfected, and there were a lot of great games around this time. But if I had to pick, it's definitely the PS2. I love the Dreamcast, I love the Nintendo GameCube, and I love the original Xbox. But the PS2 was just an all-around great console. Even though it was less powerful than the Xbox and the GameCube, it still had a lot of great games like Kingdom Hearts, SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, Devil May Cry 3, Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3, God of War, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper, Jak and Daxter, Okami, and I can go on. This is how you know the PS2 was the best, because when a console stays relevant for like 12 years and is known to being the highest selling console of all time, you know that this was a special console. It's not just the best console of the 6th generation, but the best console ever, at least in the modern era. Because, I'm sure there are some people out there that will say the NES was the best console. But yeah. If you could choose 3 things to improve on Cartoon Network, what would they be? Oh well, That's easy. Bring back more serious action cartoons like Young Justice and Symbionic Titans. Bring back the 22-minute format for certain shows. And fix that damn schedule so they can air a variety of shows. Next question comes from Edgy. What type of music are you into? Mostly rock and a lot of heavy metal. And what are your thoughts on AEW? I personally don't know anything about this AEW except for the fact that Cody Rhodes is running it and is known to being WWE's next big competitor because the company finally has a billionaire behind it. I'm not gonna get my hopes up too much, but I do wish this company the best of luck. If they want to compete against the WWE, they have to create big stars, have interesting storylines, push wrestlers that actually look badass and larger than life. So no more catering to whatever you call them, smarks or whatever. But yeah, no more catering to those type of fans who just want to watch vanilla midget indie guys just doing a bunch of flips and kicks. It's time we made wrestling great again. And as for the WWE, they seriously need some fucking competition. They've been stale for far too long, and it's about time a company steps in and takes it to Vince McMahon. But like I said, I'm not gonna get my hopes up too much. But I do wish them the best of luck. Third question. What are your thoughts on the original ECW? It was a great alternative to the WWF and WCW back in the 90s. It was a wrestling company made for adults. It was violent, mature, people were allowed to swear, the characters were cool, edgy, and badass, the storylines were awesome, and it was just hardcore. ECW was just an awesome company, and it was a damn great alternative for its time. Now, I didn't really watch ECW back in its heydays from like 1995 to 1997. I actually started watching ECW around 1999, back when it was on TNN, and this was before TNN was Spike TV. And as a kid, I wasn't really allowed to watch ECW because my parents didn't like it because it was just too mature. So often at times I would sneak to watch ECW when my parents weren't around. And when I watched ECW, it was damn awesome. And there will never be another company like ECW ever again. Next question comes from Tyson Johnson. And he asked, Rob Van Dam is my favorite WWF/WWE wrestler of all time. Can you give me your thoughts on him during your time as a former wrestling fan like myself? Dude, I fucking love Rob Van Dam. He is without a shadow of a doubt one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Hell, probably my favorite behind Stone Cold Steve Austin. I just loved Rob Van Dam in ECW. He was basically the #1 reason why I tuned into watching ECW back when I started watching in 1999. Which isn't a knock on all the other talents because I love a lot of them, from the Dudley Boys, Taz, Raven, who I'm a huge fan of, Sabu, Mike Awesome. They were all great. But there was just something about Rob Van Dam I just loved more. And I will admit, he wasn't the best on the microphone. But then again, I thought his ECW promos were way better than his WWE promos, just from his cocky persona. But I will admit, his promos were not the strongest. But aside from that, the positives outweigh the negatives. People loved RVD for his cool laid-back personality. RVD's moveset was very innovative for the time being. He was a great martial artist. He had a really, really cool ring attire. Like, every time RVD came out, whether it was ECW, WWF/E, and to some extent TNA, he always came out to the sickest, coolest ring attires ever. And I just loved the cool tribal dragon designs he would come out to, because I'm a real sucker for that stuff. And no matter what company he was in, RVD was insanely over with the fans. He had a pretty good career in ECW and WWE, and I thought his career could have been better had Rob Van Dam been given a proper world title run. But that wasn't really the case. He was buried by Triple H in the beginning of his reign of terror. Ugh. And when he was finally on top in 2006, when he was the WWE and ECW champion, he screwed up by getting high. And it's a real shame though, but RVD only had himself to blame. But still to this day, I am a huge Rob Van Dam fan. His second question, which retro console out of the two do you prefer? The PS2 or the Sega Dreamcast? Well, if you listen to what I said earlier on in the Q&A, I said that the PS2 was my favorite of the 6th generation of gaming. I do love the Sega Dreamcast, but I can't deny the PS2 was just an all-around better console. It's actually kind of funny because back then I didn't want a PS2, because I kinda held a grudge against it for killing the Dreamcast, thus forcing Sega to leave the console market. But so many great games were being released on the PS2, and I just had to get it. Eventually, I came to love the PS2, and even so much that it became my favorite gaming console. Next question comes from Nightshade. And he asked me, what are your favorite animes of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s? For the 80s, it would be Fist of the North Star. For the 90s, it's Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, Rurouni Kenshin, and Berserk. But if I had to pick, it's Yu Yu Hakusho. For the 2000s, it's Death Note. And for the 2010s, it's Attack on Titan. Number 2, what are your thoughts on Metal Gear Solid Rising Revengeance? It's an awesome, fast-paced hack-and-slash spin-off set in the Metal Gear Solid universe. The Zenitsu feature is a lot of fun and never gets old no matter how many times you do it. It may lack the story of the other Metal Gear Solid games, but it's still a hell of a lot of fun to play. And Raiden is a badass character, and he is now one of my favorite gaming characters of all time. I would hope for a sequel, but Konami chose to do mobile games. And it's a real shame. And number 3, do you think the 90s was the best time for cartoons? I don't want to come off as one of those people everything from the 90s was great, and nothing will ever measure up to it. But I will say it was the time that I enjoyed watching cartoons the most. But it's just that I look back at the 90s as a time when animation was starting to be taken seriously, as not just something kids can enjoy, but also adults as well. Because you had a lot of comedy shows with adult references like Freakazoid, Ren and Stimpy, dark action cartoons like Batman the Animated Series and Gargoyles, and badass action shows like Beast Wars, Transformers, and SWAT Cats. You had so much variety from comedy and action, and it was truly a special time in animation. And it really was. Anime was starting to become popular. You even had the Disney Renaissance movies like The Lion King, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast, which got Disney out of the dark ages, and was when Disney was finally getting back on track with their animated movies. So it was definitely a special time for animation, and definitely my favorite time for sure. Okay, so next question comes from a gaming dude in 1998. And he asks, what's your favorite 90s console? And who's your favorite Final Fantasy character? My favorite 90s console is either the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo, but if I had to choose, it'd be the Sega Genesis. And my favorite Final Fantasy character is Sephiroth. Next question comes from Licka. What are your thoughts on the Miss Marvel movie? And do you think it will suck? It probably will, and I really don't care for it, or any superhero movie coming out. What, is it gonna be one of those movies where if you boycott it, then you're sexist or misogynistic? No way. Anything that involves pushing some type of SJW or feminist agenda has zero interest for me. And his final question, do you think Spectacular Spider-Man will ever get a season 3? It's not likely it'll happen anytime soon. Because you gotta remember that Sony still owns the rights to Spectacular Spider-Man. And the only way it's gonna work is if Sony gave up the rights to Disney. Plus, even if that were to happen, and Disney were up to do a season 3, they'd have to bring back Greg Weisman to produce the show. And that's not gonna happen because he'd have to leave Young Justice in order to continue Spectacular Spider-Man. And I'm enjoying Young Justice Outsiders so far, and I really wouldn't want him to leave and then the show gets canceled again. I would love for Spectacular Spider-Man to come back, but at this point in time, it's unlikely it's ever going to happen.